Hey, everybody. How are you? It is so good to be back. It's hard to believe it's been since November since we've done a virtual event. I have been looking forward to it, and especially because it's Sarah Sundin. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read her new book already, but let me tell you, it's a good one. It's probably my favorite of hers, partly because it was set in a city that I got to visit a couple of years ago before COVID, before BC, before COVID. So it was fun to read and wander the streets with our main character, Lucy. So Sarah will be joining us from California. She just let me know that she's just finished edits on the next book, which I am very excited to hear about. So we'll talk about that a little later. So thanks for joining us tonight, Sarah.
Well, thank you for having me. I was so excited to be invited.
Good. So I'm going to have you tell everybody what the Until Leaves Fall in Paris is about.
Here we go. It just came out on Tuesday. Until Leaves Fall in Paris follows two Americans in Nazi-occupied Paris. And Lucy Gerard is an American ballerina who gives up the ballet and buys a bookstore to allow the Jewish owners to escape. And then she finds a way to help the resistance by passing notes between the leaves of her books. And meanwhile, Paul Aubrey is an American businessman a recent widower. He just wants to go home and take his little girl with him. But the US Army convinces him to stay and to pass secrets about his German customers home for the US military. And they meet each other, and he's very enthralled with her, but she is appalled when she finds out that he sells to the Germans. That is an affront to everything she believes in. But his little daughter, Josie, is enraptured with the bookstore and with Lucy. And so he keeps taking her back to the bookstore, and they get to know each other, and exciting things happen.
And you're right. And I have to admit, the little girl Josie was just the cutest little thing ever. One of the things I was struck about, and it just struck me again, is how normal you made their lives outside of what they were doing for and during the war, even though Americans weren't at war yet. Was that easier to do or harder? Because, your books are during World War II, almost every one of them. I'm trying to think if there was one that wasn't.
All of them.
Okay, good. At least I was right about something. So is it easier to set one where the life is normal like that? Or is it easier to write one like, okay, we're at war and this is what's happening?
A little bit of both. In a way, it's much faster to write when I'm not working combat scenes. When I was writing the ones with very detailed, I had all my maps out and ship's logs and all that stuff, trying to get all the details. And so those combat scenes can be very, I don't want to say tedious to write, but you really have to stay on target and then, but still be telling the story. So it can be a little more trying. So, writing a story, writing a scene set in a bookstore, you can pretty much just write it. Obviously, there's a lot of research that goes in, but it's more background. It's more underneath the surface than with the combat scenes where it's like right there. The research really becomes a story in certain ways. So in certain ways it is easier, but it was our everyday life, but it wasn't, because there were so many differences with the occupation, and even just buying bread was quite an ordeal. And the French weren't allowed to buy pastries. You could only buy regular bread. So there were all these things that they had to go through that made everyday life very difficult.
So what is the research you do? And is it different, even though, again, your time frames are the same. There's a period of time, but is your research really different for each book? Or are you able to kind of go, oh, I already know where to go for this, and then draw it into another book?
A little of both.
Okay.
My overall general research of World War II comes into play. So I know what's going on in the world, throughout the world, and that really helps. So for example, I've done a lot of research on the US home front for past books. Now, this book was not set on the US home front, but they are Americans who are in France. And so what's going on in the home front affects them to a certain extent. And so they're going to they want to know what's going on, but they can't, there's very little communication. So there's a certain awareness there that goes into play. Also knowing what was mentality of Americans in the 30s and 40s to try to, that'll affect it. So certain general research does, but every single book I write, I find myself thinking, okay, this will be easier because I've already done this. Like, well, no, because, and I wasn't sure what kind of questions, so I brought all my research, some of my research books out, and it's a tall stack for this novel. And I just end up doing a lot of research for each book because there's something new in each book that requires a different tack. And it's fascinating because I after writing in World War II for quite a while now, you get to the point where you think you know not everything, but close to it. And nope, every single story I find something I absolutely know nothing about, and I'm constantly growing my knowledge, and it's fun. It expands my perspective on what I thought I knew.
I agree. To be honest with you, until I read this, I never even really thought about the Americans that lived in Paris or France in general. And what happened to them at the beginning of the war, and did they go home? Did they carry on? What did they do? So it was interesting to go, and I did not do any of the research in depth like you did, but to read about that, that was just, I'm glad you wrote about it. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and that's actually what inspired this book was, since I was writing, I was working on a proposal for a 3-book contract, and I didn't want to write a series, but I had 2 story ideas that were firm, that had Americans in either Nazi Germany, which was When Twilight Breaks, or Nazi occupied Denmark, which will be the third book coming out next year. But I needed a 3rd book, and I didn't know what to do. And so I just started doing some research. I'm like, what about France? Everybody loves France. I love France. France would be an amazing setting. And I thought, well, were there Americans in France? I mean, Nazis are coming, run. That's what we think we would do. But in reality, there were thousands of Americans who stayed in France after June 1940, when France fell, up until December 1941. Now, granted, they were leaving in droves in that time period, but still, as of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, there were still a couple thousand Americans in Paris. And of course, the question that I had was why would they stay? And so this novel is almost is my response to that, is like, why would they stay? And obviously the answers are as varied as there were human beings who stayed. Some stayed because they were married to French people, or some of them had business concerns, some had artistic concerns. There were actually a lot of African Americans who stayed because Paris had always been a place of freedom for them. And America, they were segregated, and a lot of them had come over with the US forces in World War I and found they were more accepted in France than they had been in America. The French loved jazz, and they just made a home for themselves there. So there was this huge expatriate community in Paris at the time. And so what do you do? And really, really fascinating.
Yeah, isn't that? And I guess that's, with Lucy taking over the bookstore, and I mean, I know you base that loosely on Shakespeare and Company, yes, and the things they did during World War II. And of course, that made me research them more. And yeah, books do that to me. I always end up on some rabbit trail somewhere. So, but I think that's interesting, because even the characters that come and go from the bookstore that are American, each one had a different story. Yeah. So yeah, I love that you brought that out. So
yeah, that's actually so there's Shakespeare and Company. That's Sylvia Beach's book, and that was the story that inspired this novel, was that there was an American woman, a single American woman, who was running this bookstore in the 20s and 30s. It was the place for the expatriates, the literati. Hemingway, that was his home away from home. He actually came with the US forces after D-Day, and when they liberated Paris, first place he went was to find Sylvia Beach. So just a little interesting side note. But anyway, she stayed. And she kept that bookstore running until December 1941. It didn't close because of that. She had a German officer who wanted her original copy of James Joyce's, I can't remember which one of them was. Anyway, and that was something that she had helped publish in great personal cost. She says, "You're not having it." And so she ended up closing down her bookstore, and they did this amazing thing where all her friends came and they took all her books from the entire bookstore, hid them, took down the sign, hid that, and basically transformed the store into be nothing in hours. And so when the Germans came back, there was no store for them to take over. So,
isn't that amazing? Human
anyway,
nature is amazing.
yeah, exactly. So so that's what Sylvia Beach did. So that was like, oh, that was intriguing to me. So I thought, well, I could have my own heroine, have her own bookstore. And then while I was doing my research, I found this book called The Other Americans in Paris. And it was about, we always think about the left bank people, the artists, the literati, the dancers, the bohemians. And there was this whole American colony on the right bank. These are respectable people. These were businessmen and members of the Chamber of Commerce. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if I put those two together? So that's what I did.
And wonderfully. I love them both. So,
oh, thank you.
And that book is Ulysses. James Joyce's.
Actually, it was, she did publish Ulysses, but it was Finnegan's Wake was the book that she had, right, that the German wanted. And so she says, okay, we're not having that. James Joyce was her personal project, and
she did a lot of interesting things. We could have discussion about what she did.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I had to create my own character, because there's so many things in her story that would not be acceptable in Christian fiction. But regardless, she is an incredible woman. She was very brave. She was very generous. She was very kind-hearted. And so I took some of those qualities and put them on my own character.
And you even bring out the parts about where when the list would come out of the next books that were going to be banned. And you brought that out where, the people of Paris, whether they were Americans or the French, came and helped take care of those books to save them.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool.
I think so too. Yeah. I wasn't able to work it into the story, but the American Library in Paris was also protecting a lot of books by Jewish authors and by communist authors. Anybody who was banned by the Nazis, they were sheltering a lot of books.
Yeah, I think I read one last year before about the American Library. So
there's a novel that just came out about it. Paris Library, actually, and it's about the American Library in Paris.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I was looking at that as a story idea too. And I went with the bookstore and said, so I'm really glad I did, because it would have been bad to have two books about the same. Exactly.
Sometimes I wonder if there's an email that goes out and then you guys all write the same stories. So.
Oh yeah. It's funny, because one of my writing friends has a book coming out next year. And it's about Lisbon and American librarians in Lisbon. And I'd read that article. I was like, I want to write the story. And I'd actually talked about it with my editor, and she says, we can't sell Lisbon. But my friend wrote that book, and it's getting published next year. And I'm really glad my editor said no, because that book's coming out, or her books came out this year, and mine would have been coming out for another year or two. So it would have looked like I was copying her, which would have been bad. So.
Did you read my book first?
Yeah.
Oh, here's a great question that just got sent in. Who was the hardest or most difficult character to develop or write? And I'm assuming they mean in this book. So, but you're welcome to comment on any of your books. So,
actually, I would say it's and this is, I'm actually blanking on my character's name. It's the German character, starts with a W.
Oh, yeah.
I'm blanking.
Guy that would go into the factory.
Yes.
Yeah, what's his name? I can look too quick. So let's see.
Thank you.
Figure it out.
Not the factory, the one who came into the bookstore.
Oh, the guy that was in love with Lucy?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I mean, you can't like the guy that, is very Nazi, but I kind of liked his character because you make him human.
That was the idea. And because it's so easy to write Nazis that are just, they become caricatures and they become cartoons. And originally, I think I had him develop a little differently. And I always had him in love with her, and kind of looked like he was open-minded. And in one version, I had him going one way at the ending, and in the version, and I won't tell you which way it was, but in the other ending, and I had him turn the other direction. So, and then I had my two German characters that were fairly major characters in the story. I was trying to make them, multidimensional, that they weren't just, caricatures, that they weren't, all diehard fanatics. And some of them were there for different reasons. So I was trying to show that without lightening and say, oh yeah, they really weren't that bad. No, they were bad. The Nazis are horrible, horrible.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. But individually, we can look at them as individuals and try to find stories that are a little more interesting. So that can be hard, because especially when they end up being, I don't want to say villains, because I don't think neither of them were villains, especially the one that Paul interacted with. I always have more troubles with my villains, because the temptation is to make them, the mustache twirling, all evil all the time, and to make them more multidimensional is always challenging.
Well, I think you did a good job in this book, because there were a couple times I went, oh, rats, I like that guy. So, and I'm trying not to give anything away, so I'm trying to phrase this correctly. And it's no secret that this book includes the French Resistance. I found it interesting, and readers, do not read the back of the book first. You have to read the story, and then you can read Sarah's notes later, okay? So don't go read them now. Behave yourselves. But you talk about that, and I found it interesting that the timeline was a lot different for when the resistance, for some reason in my head, it was like, oh, the French Resistance, it started as soon as the Germans got there. But it didn't. And I thought that was interesting. You brought that up.
Yeah, and that was really interesting when you think about it, they had to invent the concept of resistance. When we talk about resistance now, we always, whenever there are groups, they harken back to occupied groups that were resisting the communists later on. They harken back to those resisting the Nazis. They invented the concept. What do you do when you are occupied by a foreign power, and how do you react to that? So the first year, they were just numb. And the Germans behaved themselves. They actually had a nickname for them. They called them the corrects, because they were so polite and well behaved. All these, these reprisal shootings and crackdowns, they weren't doing it. They weren't arresting the Jews. Life was difficult, but it wasn't horrific like we always expect, like what we know happened in Nazi occupied countries. It wasn't like that in France at the beginning. That slowly changed as people learned how to resist, as the Germans started slowly cracking down on the Jews, because they never did it all at once. It was always a very slow process. First you ban them from certain jobs, and then you make them wear yellow stars, and then maybe you deport the foreign Jews, because France was more than willing to get rid of the foreign Jews, because they were poor and they were taking jobs. And only later do you deport the French Jews, because they're our people. And so it was a slow process, and the story takes place fairly early. So the Holocaust in France was, they had some restrictions on the Jews. The yellow stars weren't required until 1942. They had a few what they called raffles, that it's spelled R-A-F-L-E, not like a pulling a prize. It's just spelled, it means round up in French. And they had the first two ones in mid 1941. And once again, they were rounding up foreign male Jews of military age. And so the French police participated in that. They were rounding them up, which is just appalling. Yeah. So this was just started, but it was only a couple thousand. And it really wasn't until 1942 that they started doing the huge roundups and deporting them to Auschwitz. So, so this was early in the process, and the resistance started slow, and it started picking up in 1941. One of the key factors is actually when the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, because resistance started primarily in communist groups, and because they're so ideologically opposed to the Nazis. So that was a logical place for the resistance to start. And before that, Germany and the USSR were allies. So it wasn't until Germany invaded the USSR that the communists were suddenly free to resist the Nazis, and so they just went crazy. And then, of course, it spread throughout society, and so that there were other groups that were involved too. But so in 1941 started, and as the more they resisted, then the more the Germans cracked down. Then you started seeing the hostages being taken and hostages shot. And as German reprisals grew, the resistance grew. And every time the Germans cracked down, more people joined the resistance. And so it became this death spiral, really. But it created the resistance. And so by the time of D-Day, you have what we all think of as the French resistance with all these little cells out in the wild, the Maquis, and they were, blowing up railroads, and they were doing all these amazing things. And by 1944, that was the case. But in 1940-41, it wasn't. So it was really interesting to see that that growth of that whole movement.
And I totally agree with that. I mean, it was one of those things that it was like, and I had read the whole book, obviously, and then got to your notes in the back, and it was like, oh, see, now this makes sense. So there you go. But
yeah, because I knew I was going to get questions like, well, she didn't use the word Maquis. Maquis is the right word. Like, yes, it was after 1942, 43. Yes, when they started using it, but not in 41. So
yeah, it's just also interesting because I know, I think you're on Facebook or, any of your other outlets, you do that in this day in World War II. And some of the facts are like, who knew that? So it's just interesting. So I got a bunch of questions from online. So this is great. Are you enjoying this switch where you wrote more civilian than military, or is this just something you had fun with for a while? Are you going to go back to more military again?
We'll see on my next contract. So these three are more civilian resistance type books. My next three are also, they're set in Britain, and one will be revolving around the Blitz, and one will be set in Scotland. I can't wait for that one.
And I have somebody to go with you on a research trip.
I know I want to go, so I'm praying I get to go. So I have everything. One of them has kind of a murder mystery, and one has some espionage, and one has some resistance stuff going on. So not the straight battle type stories that my first 12 books were, but I'll never say never, because who knows? I might right now. European set World War II history is very popular, and that could change again. So, or I might just get a really great idea for another home front story or a U.S. military story. I might even go another era. I have no plans for that right now. That thought horrifies me because first of all, I have so much research done for World War II. And because I have my whole brand is built around World War II, it's like the website, all that stuff is built around World War II. So going to another era would be rather overwhelming, but once again, I'll never say never, because there might just be like some amazing book idea that comes to me, like I have to write this story. So we'll see.
And this, I think you probably answered it in what you have just said, but is there another genre you would ever write in or would love to, even though, maybe never do it, but you know what I mean?
Not right now. I've always, the very first two books I ever wrote were contemporary romance. Never will be published, never should be published. Lord willing will be burnt when I die. They were my starter novels, and that's okay. I needed to write them because I needed to learn I could write a book. Before that, I never had a story idea. I'd never tried to write a book. The thought of writing a whole novel seemed impossible. How do you do it? I had no idea. And then the story idea came to me, and I just wrote it literally on notebook paper with the number 2 pencil. I stole the paper from my kids' school stash and wrote it freehand and wrote the whole thing. And it was a horrible mess, but I learned I could write a whole novel, and it looked like a novel. It was a very long, very bad novel, but it was a novel. And I thought it was horrible. I thought it was wonderful at the time. I thought it was just amazing. And it would be like the best thing ever in Christian publishing. And why on earth weren't people interested in buying a 750-page contemporary romance?
Pretty good guess.
Yeah.
750 pages. It's
750. Every little conversation they had, I put in there. Oh, everything they did was
At least you learned to edit a little.
I learned how to edit, yes. So anyway, so as I said, I started off with contemporary romance, but I really found my voice with historical. So I think historical is a good fit for me. But once again, I have no idea what the future will hold. So, and World War II is super popular. It wasn't. When my first novel came out, it was not popular.
Yeah.
I had a lot
You're
of
right.
resistance to it. I had a hard time selling that first novel, really, really hard time selling it. And when it first came out, people were like, World War II, I don't know. And now it's huge. So for the first time in my life, I actually hit a trend. So,
Started it all.
I know. It's like, yeah. So anyway, but trends are trends. And trends have a lifespan. And so, but then again, they keep saying Amish will die, and it hasn't. So,
No, I think all the trends, there is always going to be the fans. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's reading it, but there will always be somebody that reads it, because readers are readers. And, some people are like me, where you read everything. And then some people are very focused on a certain genre. And I think World War II books will always have that. Now,
I think so too.
yeah, right now it's huge. You're right. It's huge, but
huge. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, the thing is, like, looks like I'm established enough in the genre. So if the genre is less popular, I might be able to continue on it, or I might just say, hey, you know what? I'd like to write women's fiction. Why not? So we'll see. That's every 3 years, when it's time to write a new proposal and send it to my publisher, I sit down with my editor and my agent, and we talk about what's next. Should I continue?
Good way to do it. So, well, right now we're going to enjoy your World War II books. So.
Well, thank you. I'm enjoying writing them.
So somebody wants to know, with all the research you do you read World War II books, fiction books, for fun? Or do you step out and read something else?
Yeah, right now it seems like that's all I'm reading, because I am established in World War II and it is popular. Everybody's sending me books for endorsement and for review, which it's wonderful. And I'm seeing some really great stuff that's coming out, some really good novels that are coming out. So, but because of that, I'm getting a lot of them. I'm finally, I'm becoming a little bit more mean about it. Like I'm full. But I honestly, before that, I would say I read very broadly, especially in history. I loved reading about all different eras. I think it's fascinating because it's almost like time. It's like time travel. You get to go and you get to live in a different era. And I've always, well, my parents are readers, and they read widely. They still read widely. And so I like to read widely too, but I've been very hyper focused on World War II because I keep getting them in my queue. Like, I got to read that one. After I finish this, I'll read what I want to read. But I'm getting, and of course, the World War II books I'm getting are I'm really enjoying them. So, but yeah, I'm reading Laurie Benton's books, Mountain Laurel and Shiloh, which are set in late 1700s. It's kind of refreshing to not be reading World War II right now.
Yeah, you got to do that too. So,
yeah.
I have the luxury of going, well, what do I want to read next?
Mm-hmm.
You are, part of your job even is to read.
Yeah, it is part of my job.
Yeah.
It's a good part of my job. I mean, I get to read.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it sucks. So.
Yeah.
Where was the one? Somebody liked that you used all the candy names for the little girl. Now I can't remember. I must have dropped it somewhere. So did that start out planned that way, that you would, and we're not giving a major plot line away, so don't worry.
No.
But
I honestly don't know where that came from. First time she came in, I think he called her Lemon Drop or something, and because she was wearing a yellow dress, I had her wearing it. Might not, or I think he called her Jelly Bean the very first scene. Anyway, I just thought it was cute. And then the next scene, she was wearing something yellow, and he called her Lemon Drop. I was like, oh, that's fun. And so then I just like, what if he tried to use different candies each time? And then I was doing research, like what candies were available in 1940, so that I learned some of the candies that I was going to use, like, oh, those didn't exist in 1940. Because I'm a total nerd that way. I can't use it. So anyway, and then it's just kind of a fun thing to throw them in and try to find ones that fit. So when she's at the doctor's office and she's just wearing her little underwear, and she'd be all white, he called her Marshmallow, and so it was just kind of fun.
Awesome. To be honest with you, until somebody said something in the book, I'm like, oh, he does do that. I didn't even catch it. That's embarrassing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was just a little thing, and it was kind of fun because
I agree.
He has a strained little relationship with his daughter. He doesn't understand her, But I thought the nicknames were kind of a way to show his heart for her, that he really, he just adores this little girl. He just doesn't know what to do with her. She's creative.
And one of the things I really, really enjoyed in this book, and it just dawned on me, I meant to ask you this earlier, was your female characters, whether, was it Paul? I'm going to mess up his name, his late wife. I mean,
Yeah, Simone.
what she did as a career, and then Lucy, who runs a bookstore, and there were a couple other ones in there. And I really appreciated that those female leads were, I can do this with or without a man. I don't need you to do what I'm doing. And I really appreciated that. So it's fun to have you here. That's not what I'm saying, but
yeah,
I really appreciated that.
Yeah, life plus a man. So, and of course, I come from, I went to college, high school and college in the 80s when it was all about, you can do everything, you can be career mom. So part of that has, kind of seeped into who I am. And I was a chemistry major, I'm a pharmacist, and I was a pharmacist. I no longer practice pharmacy, but so I've come from this background of having a career, and my husband has always been fine. I mean, he met me in pharmacy school, so he's always been very supportive, and so it's kind of like what I've lived, and it's fun to write women like that too.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and to hear their stories now. I think that's one of the reasons I'm enjoying the World War II books, is we're getting the women's story too. Because I can remember the men did this, and the men did that, and the men did this, and not to take away from them. I mean, I know a lot of World War II vets and things like that, so they were amazing. But the women did a lot of really cool things too. And to hear those now, like, Sylvia, I mean, she ran, but Lucy in the book, she ran a bookstore. It was part of the resistance. I'm not sure I could do that. How brave do you got to be? So
yeah. And that's been fun. I've always enjoyed exploring both the men's stories and the women's stories. And so I get the traditional excitement of the action of what the men are doing, but also tempered with the women trying new things and getting to try on new roles. And the 40s were such an interesting era, because these women came completely from the traditional mindset and of the home-based woman. Now, granted, they were very, very community oriented, and I think we give short shrift to what women did before women's lib and all that. Women were extreme. There was this before feminism. There's this myth that they were just trapped in their houses all day. It's like, oh no, they were running the PTA and the women's club, and they were doing everything. And what they were doing was amazing. They were doing a lot of things that our government does now too. And so, and not quite as well. But they were running things, and it was always very quiet work. It was volunteer work, but they were getting a lot of stuff done. So anyways, that they came from that, and then be thrust into a more career-based world because of the war, especially on the home front, where these girls who are being raised to be good little housewives, and suddenly go work in the factory. And it was shocking, but it also was kind of interesting to them, like, oh, I never thought I could learn to use a rivet gun, but look at me, I'm riveting. This is fun. And so it was really a time for women to expand their views of who they were and what they could do in life. And I always say that those of us who were born after that time, we owe a lot to them, because obviously they went back into the home community roles after the war again, but those are really the seeds for the movements in the 60s and 70s, where you started seeing women going more into careers. So for better, for worse, obviously we've given up a lot in the process, but overall, I mean, honestly, it's a great freedom for women that we aren't, you don't have to be married to survive. And that's huge. So.
And I agree with that. So, okay, now that we're done being on my rabbit trails, I've got a couple questions, and I'm going to ask them both, but they have to do with the next series, not your next standalone that's coming out, which we do want to talk about. Don't let me leave without talking about that one because it fascinated me, just the one chapter I read. But one person asked, can you tell us a little bit or anything about that next 3-book series? Probably, where's it set, and then somebody asked if the characters in that series are going to be connected.
There is going to be a loose connection. What I did with these 3 books, there's a loose connection. Peter, Paul, and Henrik are friends from Harvard. So there's that very loose connection there. I almost regret doing it because partly because I loved Simone. Simone was a side character in Simone Aubrey was a side character in When Twilight Breaks, and I absolutely loved her. And I knew she had to die, and that just killed me. And I was like, well, I should have just, when I had that idea, I should have nixed it and said, no, these are standalones. These are pure standalones. But the series writer in me is like, ooh, there's a connection. I can connect them. So, but then the funny thing was, my publisher and I were like, let's make this standalones. For marketing reasons, there was some good reasons to do standalones. But then we had some issues with the audiobook publisher, and they wanted them to have a series connection. So they had to say, oh yeah, there's a series, look, they're connected. So you just can't win. So anyway, so the next 3 books, they are standalones, but there's a connection. They are 3 cousins. They are actually from Holland, and they each end up in the British Isles for different reasons. And so all 3 stories are set in Britain. And the first one involves a Dutch woman who is fleeing after the fall of France. And I won't go into all the details, but she gets separated from her little boy. And so she's trying to find him in London and during the Blitz. And then the hero is a BBC reporter. And so I had some journalism with When Twilight Breaks with my heroine. And so I get to go kind of back into the journalism world in the Blitz. The second book, the Dutch woman gets herself kind of mixed up with, because of her brothers. And I'm going to make this really nebulous because I'm still fleshing out these details. She ends up being recruited to be a spy being sent to Britain for the Germans. But she really doesn't want to do that. She has some family in Britain, and so she's planning to turn over, but she isn't planning on getting caught by a handsome Scottish naval officer on the shores of Scotland, and who turns her in to be executed. But they turn her into a double agent, and she gets sent back to his base, and of course, handsome Scottish naval officer, and so. And there's a lighthouse in that one.
Oh, you've got all the details. And around here, anybody from the Netherlands, man, a little south here. So
yeah, especially in your area. And the third one, he's the Dutch man. He's an engineer, and he's in the resistance, and he finds his way to be part of what they called Operation Todt, which was the German building of all the defenses. And so he joins that so that he can send plans back to the resistance, but they send him to the Channel Islands, and he's very isolated. And she is a Channel Islands girl who is a physician, and they get into some interesting stuff. So these stories are still pretty early in production. So
Things could change a little bit yet. So
yeah, don't quote me on any of this, please. By the time they're actually written, a lot of this will have changed dramatically, I'm sure.
Where's the one I was going to ask? I keep putting them in different order because I want to ask them, and then I misplace the ones I want to ask. What would it take? And this is there's a long thing here, so bear with me here. What would it take for you to write books more quickly? Which I think you're fast enough, but can you share about the process of your yearly schedule? And the wait for your next books are killing me is the reason for the question, which I think was so cute. So,
I love it, and I get that. Why can't you write faster? I've tried. My Waves of Freedom series came out in 9-month intervals, and it just about killed me.
that seems like a lot.
Year to write a book. I just do. I've learned that. Certain parts of it I'm super pokey at. I'm an outliner. That means I do a lot of pre-writing. I get to know my characters. I get to know my story. I'm doing some background research. And the putting together the structure of the story is very difficult for me. It's partly because I'm working around history. So everything all the pieces have to go together in order. And history is a way of destroying plot ideas, but also creating new ones. So, so that part of it takes a long time for me. And the research just takes time. And I always pick story ideas that require a lot of research. I can't seem to pick one that's like, oh, that'll be fast. No, they never are. So I'm a pokey writer and lots of research. So that's my answer. And after I quit my pharmacy job, I thought maybe I could write a little faster, but then I started co-directing a writers conference, and that kind of filled in the cracks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm back to, I'm a book a year. That's my pace.
And I never apologize for that, because the research shows, I mean, it does. And I know authors that can write faster, and I know authors that write a lot slower. So if it's what produces a good book, I'm okay with it. And I agree with them. The weight does kind of hurt, but you know.
But you know what? When I was writing Waves of Freedom, there was a lot of push from the public and from publishers to really start publishing more often. But I've noticed it's all let up, and those of us who are writing historicals, we're all writing a book a year. And I think they're realizing that's what we need. Those of us who write, good historical fiction, we really need a year to write a book. And we've got it. They let us have it because they like what we do with it, and I'm fine with that.
And so are we.
Well, at least I have a backlist now. My first book came out. It was really hard because I was like, yep. Here.
Yeah, we'll just reread the other ones.
Yeah, I got 14 other books. You can read those.
So I thought this was an interesting question. How do you balance the historical research with the storytelling? They are curious how you make history authentic without sacrificing the story.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is getting to know the history really, really well, so that it is almost to the point where it's just there, where I know World War II Paris in 1941. I know what's going on. I know the mentality. I know what people are dealing with. And at that point, I write the story. And the history just kind of works its way in. What I do find is that I overwrite history in the first draft. I let myself do that. The reader needs to know this. The reader needs to know everything. And then I cut out a lot in edits, and then my editor cuts more. And then the funny thing is my copy editor will have me put stuff back in. She says, I don't understand why this happens. Like, oh, I cut that out. So between all the editors and my critique partners, who are my writer friends who read my stuff as I'm writing it, neither of them are historical fiction authors, and neither of them is terribly, well, actually, none of them are terribly for them. And none of them are really knowledgeable about World War II, which is perfect, because they tell me when I overdo it or when I haven't explained, like, I don't understand why this is going on. And that was especially the case with my next book, which is set in Denmark. And Denmark's story is so different that it defies everything that we know about World War II. So I really had to explain a lot, like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are they doing that? That shouldn't be happening. I said, well, but it was.
Well, now I'm even looking forward to it. And since you brought it up, can you give us, I mean, I don't know if it's got a title or, what details can you share with us? How's that on your next book?
I don't have a title yet. I just did my title questionnaire in December. I'm actually expecting a title maybe this month or next month. So I'm excited. I have a title that I'm working with, which I'm not real fond of. And then but a title has emerged. So I'm waiting to see what they pick. Anyway, it is set in Denmark in 1943. And Henrik Elefelt is a baron. He is a Danish aristocrat who has lived a life of ease and wantonness, and after the Germans invade Denmark and they overtake it in a matter of hours, he just is this shock of it, and he realizes he's sick of his life and he wants to do something of importance. So he becomes a courier for the resistance, and he takes on the code name of Howman, which means merman, and it's based on Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, and there's the Little Mermaid statue in Copenhagen's harbor, and Andersen's stories are just beloved in Denmark. So so there are lots of nods to The Little Mermaid in the story. But so he's who is an Olympic rower. So he rows across. There's only 10 miles between Denmark and Sweden, and he rows across with these messages. And he kind of creates this legend. So his story is fun, but he has to live this undercover life. He can't be Baron Henrik Elefelt anymore. He becomes Hemming Andersen, as uneducated shipyard worker who basically says ja and nay, and that's about it. And he moves into this boarding house with Elsa Jensen, who is an American who stays because she is a theoretical physicist of all things, who's studying with Niels Bohr, who is the Nobel laureate, real man. And he had this institute in Copenhagen. And as a former chemistry major, Niels Bohr is like a name. I was like, I know who he is. The atomic model that we used. And so he's a huge name in chemistry and physics. And his name pops up in World War II research. He did a lot of interesting things, like, oh, this is fun. So anyway, so here's this theoretical physicist, and she meets this guy she thinks is not very bright, but he's sweet. And they find themselves drawn to each other in this odd little relationship that starts off with friendship, but there's attraction there. And so and she gets involved with the resistance. She starts mimeographing illegal newspapers in the basement of the Institute for Theoretical Physics. And meanwhile, he's also starting to work on some sabotage at the shipyard, but neither of them knows what the other one's doing. So fun story. I've got multiple identities, so kind of some Shakespearean stuff going on with, like, who's this? So yeah, fun, really fascinating history too. Fascinating.
Interesting. And I'm interested now. I'm going to have to do research on Denmark in World War II. And I think I had remembered, they took over in hours. There was, and I don't know the whole history. You probably could share, but that's fascinating. So
yeah, I could go on for a long time, but I won't. But
yeah, we only have a few more minutes, so we got.
Yeah.
So somebody wanted to know, would you ever write a book based in the specific?
I know, I do that too. I can't, because I can't say it.
I'm with you. Let's move on. No.
No, honestly. And that's one of those things also. I've had a few ideas for stories set in the Pacific. It is a hard sell. Stories set in the Pacific don't seem to resonate with Americans. I think, and I don't have data on this, but I honestly think it reminds us too much of Vietnam. And we just, fighting Asians in the jungle. There's something about that we don't like. Yeah. And so Americans aren't drawn to those stories as much as they are to, fighting the Nazis. Okay, that's good. That's good and evil. There's no, the racism was on their side, not our side. So there's something about that resonates with the Western mind. So it's hard to sell, but once again, things change. So, and if I get an amazing idea that my publisher says, oh, we absolutely must do this, then, we shall see.
And there were things that happened in the Pacific front that were very brutal. Yeah. Not to take away anything that, happened in Europe, but some of that stuff was harder to swallow, because there was a lot more that happened to the Americans. I mean, we came in Europe and went, yay, we're the heroes. Whereas there in the Pacific, we were failing for a long time, to be honest with you. And then the way we ended the war was also very, very brutal. So I wonder if that's part of it.
I think so. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's something about that doesn't quite. But there have been some books set in the Pacific, and they just don't sell as well. Yeah. So some of this comes down to I know my readers listening to this right now, and I'm talking so these things I'm talking about are marketing things. So I'm talking about what sells and what doesn't, and that's the interesting part about being a writer, is that you're always balancing story and marketing, and what are people going to be interested by? And honestly, England always sells. I mean, everybody loves England and Paris. So there's certain things that people just love and are drawn to. And in my first book that I managed to sell was set in England. So people liked that. I'm like, oh, England plus pilots and some US home front. So that I was able to sell that because of those settings. So there's always this, and obviously the story trumps everything, but at a certain point you do have to play with the marketing. And honestly, with this next series that I'm just contracted for, I didn't have the first story idea, I said, well, this could be set here, or it could be set there, or it could be set there. I had some ideas for different countries. I was thinking maybe I could go about different countries. And they kept saying, honestly, when you start getting to peripheral countries, the marketing goes down. So, which will be interesting with my Denmark book, because it's kind of on the periphery there. So anyway, so you play with both of these factors, and that's just the reality of getting published and staying published. And but I always fall in love with whichever story I pick.
Yeah, and it seems to be your readers kind of like them too. So,
Yeah, they kind of like them.
but I personally, and this is just, that Denmark one sounds interesting, because I enjoy the ones in England, and you sent this one in Paris. Those are fascinating too. Don't get me wrong, but
Oh, yeah.
here, Denmark is something we don't know a lot about, and so that just makes the story a little. And okay, I can't ask these questions because they'll give away major plot lines. But there's certain things that happen that we had no idea. This guy rowing back and forth between Sweden and Denmark. How fascinating is that? And would we do that today? Probably not.
And that was based on a real guy who was a Danish Olympic rower. He, during the rescue of the Danish Jews in October 1943, he made 17 trips across carrying Jews to freedom.
That is amazing.
Like,
amazing.
There's my hero. So I changed him. So he's acting a lot earlier, and he's doing it throughout the war instead of just during that one time period. But that was like, oh, there's my inspiration there. I love that.
I do too. That is really cool. Hey, somebody wanted to know about the Writers' Conference, and I should have asked you, what is the name of the Writers' Conference you are working with?
Yes. It's West Coast Christian Writers Conference, and it is, the name implies, on the West Coast. We are online this year because West Coast is pretty much shut down. So, and I'm very glad we made that decision just as Omicron was just peaking, and I'm very thankful we did, because a lot of our faculty are down with it right now. So it would have been quite a challenge to put on the conference. So anyway, we are traditionally based in Northern California, which is where I live. We are online right now. And so we have over 40 workshops and some amazing keynote speakers. Mary DeMuth and Sharon Norris Elliott are keynote speakers. And we're super excited about it, even if we have to meet online. But we've got an amazing leadership team. So they put together, it's fun. I do like I'm the boring spreadsheet girl, but they're like, we could do this. This is fun. Let's do that. Like, you guys go for it. I'll put together spreadsheets.
And I didn't catch if you said the dates.
Oh, I'm a horrible marketing person. So
you do spreadsheets, not marketing.
This is why we have a marketing person on the team. It is February 18th and 19th, and registration is still open. You just go to westcoastchristianwriters.com, and it's on my website too. So yes. And that's the cool thing about being online is anybody can go, no matter where you live, you can come.
And I have to admit, okay, this is a rabbit trail, but that is one thing that's been really cool about this, is we can join these things that you're doing. I can't fly out there, but boy, I can join now. So that is kind of neat. I agree with that. So
we had an online conference last year too. We had people from Finland and from France. And they were thrilled because where they live, there are no Christian writers conferences. So this gave them the opportunity to attend one. And then they were meeting people. So we have all these online interaction, and they were meeting fellow Christian writers, and what a great experience for them.
Yeah.
And so we planned an online component for this, even when we were planning an in-person conference. So because we want to keep ministering to those writers who can't. I mean, maybe you're a new mom with a brand new baby, you can't travel, or you're housebound due to disability. You can still come to a conference, and I love that.
Interesting. So, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Very good marketing.
Yeah, once I get the dates in there.
Right. I always forget that too. People are like, when is that? Oh, yeah, that'd be a
Oh
good
yeah,
idea.
it's only a few weeks, so.
Yeah. So, a couple more questions here. We're getting close here, but what is the most interesting thing you learned in your research and then didn't make it into any of your books or made it into the book?
Oh, boy. That's like, I'm picturing like 10,000 facts and trying to grab one.
Pick one out, just grab one.
Okay, actually one that is indirectly featured in this novel, because in my first draft of the book, at the beginning of the book, Lucy has a stash of banned books that the Germans have banned. And she sells them under the table to her best customers that she trusts. In my original draft, what she was doing was she was buying up copies of Mein Kampf, taking the cover off of Mein Kampf, burning the book and putting it around the banned book and passing it. I love this on so many levels. So many, it's just amazing. Found out one of the books on the auto list, which is a list of all the books banned by the Germans, was Mein Kampf. Why would the Germans ban Hitler's book? Well, it had to do with the French translation. They did not like, Hitler was appalled by the French translation. I guess for some reason he felt it put him in a bad light. Like, you have a good side? I don't know. But
Have you read the book, sir?
yeah, exactly. So anyway, so it was banned in France. And fascinating little tidbit, but that put a little hole in my plot. So I had her using dictionaries, which wasn't nearly as good as the Mein Kampf. So it would have been better, but history. So I had to work around history. And but I thought that was a fascinating little tidbit.
That is interesting.
They banned it in France.
Huh.
There you go.
French people, they were just fighting him the minute they heard about him.
Yeah.
So, and then this is kind of it's a different question, but I kind of like it because I'm going to read the question. We'll go from there.
Yes.
Did you ever wonder if you could make the same sort of ethical decisions that your characters face?
I do all the time. Because as I'm writing them, as I'm writing Lucy, I am Lucy. When I'm writing Paul, I am Paul. And so I'm asking myself these questions. Would Sarah Sundin actually do this? And Sarah Sundin is a total coward. And so I get to live vicariously through my very brave characters.
Brilliant.
But also, I think Paul reflects this. He's a little girl. So when he starts getting involved, it's like, how is this going to affect my daughter? He's a widower. He's the only family his family. She is family in France, but they're not very nice people. And his family is in the United States. So he has to take that in consideration. And in reality, the vast majority of people who were involved in the resistance in every country were young single men. So, men in their late teens to early 20s, that time where they're fearless and they have, they can drive. Yeah, I'm going to go 125, no problem, around the steep curve. So that's young men, gotta love them. So they're fearless and they were unattached. So they didn't have wives and children to take into consideration. So, and I have to think, what would I do as a middle-aged woman, married, grown children? The grown children wouldn't be affected by me, but you have to think about, you think about the jobs, like, would this affect my job? Would I lose my job? How would this affect the family? Would I lose my home? So you start to think about all these considerations, and you do wonder, what would you do? And honestly, the vast majority of people in all the occupied countries and in Nazi Germany, the most common attitude was keep your head down, don't get noticed, get by, survive, pray it gets better. So don't make waves because you don't want to get killed. So, and honestly, that's going to be that big clump in the middle, the people who were mentally opposed to Germans and the Nazis, but didn't dare get involved for many different reasons. So honestly, if I have to look at myself, honestly, I would probably be there in that middle of keep your head down, don't get noticed. Whether I would have tried to do something quiet, like, Lucy feels like she's doing something quiet. It ends up being more dangerous than she lets on, than she realizes it as it progresses. But I don't know. You never really know unless you actually get yourself in these situations. And
yeah, I have to admit, I'm a big chicken. So So I probably would be hiding under the desk with you. So it'll be fine. We'll be fine under there, I promise.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've got a character in my next book who is a very good, well-behaved, law-abiding woman. And she, not to give out too many spoilers, she goes in the opposite direction because she loves law and order so much. And these people who are involved with the resistance are causing problems. They're really causing problems. And so she gets pulled in the other direction.
Yep.
So you've got good law abiding people who make different decisions because for different reasons. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, which makes for an interesting, thought-provoking story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's so much easier than, evil Nazis and good resistance fighters. And, sometimes the resistance fighters were horrible people. And some of the people on the German side were good people and so trying to balance that out and of showing the spectrum, especially looking at the French, the spectrum from active resistance to passive resistance to keep your head down to passive collaboration to full on collaboration. So there was that spectrum, and it's very interesting to look at and wonder.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to that book already. So where can, obviously besides bakerbookhouse.com, where can we find information about you?
SarahSundin.com, and my name is there on Zoom, spelled correctly on the book. So.
Oh, it is on the book correctly. That's good, because otherwise
it's really
have a
good.
talk with your publisher.
I think my favorite ones when I get people reviewing my books and stuff like that, and talk about, oh, Susan did this and Susan did that.
Who's Susan?
It's like, oh, right there on the cover. So anyways, SarahSundin.com. I get called Susan all the time. It's funny because one of my best friends is also a Susan. So
if I ever call you Susan in a review, you just call me up and yell at me.
Do that. Yeah. So anyway, SarahSundin.com, and my website has been beautifully redesigned. Just went live about a week ago, and it's so pretty. So come just look around and marvel on the prettiness. So
awesome. And are you on Facebook or Instagram?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, and I'm at Sarah Sundin at all of those. So please find me and say hi.
We will. Well, it has been a pleasure and fascinating. The things you have said and taught us tonight has just been fun to listen to. So thank you so much for joining us. It was good. And we'll look forward to talking about Copenhagen. And although those words I can say. So,
yes. The Danish words, ooh.
Yeah, that one we might have to worry
Weird
about.
language.
Yeah. So, but yes, we are looking forward to your next book. Oh, I should ask, do you have a release date yet? Or is it just
it should be, it'll be February, but I don't have an official. It should be, I should say, it should be February. I probably won't have the official release date till the cover comes out, which will be June or July.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to the cover reveal too. So, and I mean, it's got a lot to live up with this one.
Oh, I know.
So,
so beautiful. Yes.
Well, good. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody that did enjoy or sent in questions and just listened along. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. So, and we will see you all again soon.